Hello everybody! Today, I want to talk about something. As many of you probably know, I am a big fan of internet horror, and especially one of my favorite subcategories, analog horror. From the early pioneers of the genre, things like Local 58 and Gemini Home Entertainment, into its modern age with the Mandela Catalog and Walton Files, I love every end of analog horror and everything in between. However, it seems that for whatever reason, a lot of you all don't agree with me. Every day I see something about how analog horror is dead, or how the genre can never recover from all of the bad variations that have come out recently. And many people view it as a passing fad that had its time in the limelight and is now gone forever. And while the age of analog nightmares will almost certainly come to an end eventually, that day is not today, and I'm going to tell you why. Every day the internet produces new nightmares and new terrors that I never thought possible. And an example of this incredible new age of analog horror is a series I have recently found and has since become a personal favorite of mine, Greylock. Greylock follows a horrific series of fictionalized events that take place around the real-world location of Greylock Mountain, Massachusetts. Greylock uses a lot of the conventions and mainstays of analog horror, a genre that's been around for some time at this point, but it uses them in such unique ways. The series altogether weaves this story involving ancient cults, alien civilizations, and monstrous humanoid creatures. It is a nightmarish thrill ride from beginning to end, and I am so excited to talk about it today. Now, originally, I was just going to make a video about Greylock as another analog horror series that I personally enjoy. But as I mentioned a minute ago, there's a lot of people that believe analog horror is dead and buried. And even though I disagree with you, I also see where you're coming from. For every Greylock or Mandela catalog that I come across, I've gone through the weeds of a lot of not Greylocks or Mandela catalogs. I understand that there's a lot of bad for all of the good that the genre has to offer. And one popular example of the bad that the genre has to offer is the other series that we're going to be talking about today, The Painter, made by UrbanSPOOK. Now, The Painter, or more specifically UrbanSPOOK, is a creator and series that has garnered a lot of infamy as of lately, both because of the series' content as well as the creator's actions. And to be completely honest with you, I couldn't care less about internet or Twitter drama, even if the creator of The Painter has said some rather dumb things. My only goal today is to talk about why elements of one story work and why elements of the other story do not. I'm not really concerned with the ethics or conversation around storytelling, I just want a good story told. That being said, I would otherwise never just criticize a series or talk about problems that it has, because I would feel bad doing that. You know, this person created stuff, threw it out into the world, and now I'm bad-mouthing it. However, the things that UrbanSPOOK has said online does make me feel a bit not as bad about doing this, so I guess there's that. And I also want to make something very clear. I don't want this, even though the majority of the criticism will fall that way, I don't want this to be viewed as the good one and the bad one. There is a lot of really good stuff in The Painter, and there's some bad stuff within Greylock. But there's a reason each of these series have the overall reputation that they do. So I want to go through each one of them today, talk about their story, talk about what's cool, what's lame, and everything in between. I also want to make it clear that the reason I picked these two series for this video is not only because I really like Greylock and I'm not that big a fan of The Painter, but also because they have a lot of similarities. Greylock has 11 episodes, The Painter has 8. Both of them put the phrase analog horror in their actual video titles, and both of them are coming out so recently that in creation for this video, both series dropped a new episode. So while I am putting them in this video just for that reason, I don't want anyone to view this as if they're in competition with each other. Both of these are creative endeavors that are completely unrelated one to the other, and their only connection is this stupid little, I guess you could say, video essay of mine. And most importantly, regardless of what I say throughout this video, do not harass or try to contact or shame anyone that I talk about today. At the end of the day, I want both of these series to do really, really well, and I think both of them deserve to do really well. I mean, what kind of guy would I be if I just wanted to see people fail at a genre I enjoy so much? I want everyone to do good. Because at the end of the day, I'm just a dumb guy who hasn't actually made anything like this and just talk about it on the internet, which is way easier than what either of these guys are doing. So take my opinion with a grain of salt, as you should. Now, with all of that out of the way, there are a couple things to mention before we get started. For a while now, a lot of y'all have been telling me that you want to see me on a horror podcast. Or basically, I should get some other horror YouTubers, and we should put together a podcast where we spend a while just talking about scary stuff. And if my video timestamps to views or anything to go off of, you people seem to like that for some reason. And since I kept you all waiting so long, I figured, why do one podcast when I could do two? So I am proud to announce that I, Wendigo, am officially stepping on as co-host to two new podcasts. The first podcast is called The Red Thread. The Red Thread is a podcast that I am starting with myself, Jackson Clark of the official podcast, Charlie, aka Moist Critical, aka Penguin Zero, aka whatever you want to call him, of himself. And the Red Thread will consist of the three of us going through cryptids, conspiracy theories, unsolved mysteries, you name it. Just as a red thread on a pinboard traces the line between legend, theory, and conspiracy, the three of us will be tracing those lines through legend and mystery to find what they really mean. The Red Thread podcast will be hosted on the official podcast channel, so if you're interested in hearing us go on about everything I just mentioned, you can head to the link in the description, subscribe to the official podcast channel, where our first episode, which we've already recorded, it was a great time, you're going to love it, will be posted shortly. And the other podcast that I am starting, which I am equally as excited about, is with a co-host who I'm sure that you all know very well. That is right, myself and the legendary Meat Canyon are starting a podcast where we talk about scary stories, internet urban legend, folk tales, and myth, to trace the narrative of nightmares and find out what really scares us. All on our brand new show, CreepCast. On CreepCast, Meat Canyon and myself will be doing several of these shows on our own, but also plan to be having on several guests who I'm sure you all will be excited to see as well. CreepCast will be up on its own brand new channel, which hopefully I'll have the link to in the description by the time this video goes up. So if you're interested in checking out the Red Thread or CreepCast, both of those will be at the link in the description. Thank you all so much for the support and love and excitement you've shown to the few people I've mentioned this to. It really does mean the most, and hopefully we're able to put something together that's really special and is hopefully worth the wait. So again, thank you all so much for your support. So again, links to Red Thread CreepCast in the description, but there's one more thing I really want to mention. As you all probably saw at the beginning of the video, I have a very special product that is only available for a very limited amount of time. And that product is Legacy of the Wendigo. This design is something I put together with the team at Invis and something that I myself am very proud of. I'm going to get a regular poster out and this is getting hung up on the wall over in the corner. And it's kind of weird because of the angle of this film. You all can't see it get hung up right now, but trust me, you'll see it later. It's over there. I wanted to put something special together for a Halloween sale, and thankfully I've been able to do just that. I've talked before about how the legend of the Wendigo is so important to me, and how the stories and nightmares we tell around it are what keep the spirit alive. And here, as you can see from the poster, the group of people telling the story caused the smoke to rise and create the creature of legend. I love being able to tell a narrative through just a picture, and I love how menacing it looks with kind of the purple haze around it because, you know, we had to fit my logo in there somewhere. And I couldn't be more happy with how this product turned out, and hopefully you all are happy to have it as well. The link to this poster will be available in the description for a very short amount of time, and then it's going to be gone forever, like before the month's out. If you all enjoy this, and if it sells well, then I would love to do a series of cryptids, a series of supernatural monsters. Of course, I had to start with the Wendigo, duh. But this design really meant a lot to me, and hopefully you all enjoy it. I would also mention at this point that there are a limited series of 100 autographed posters for sale, but I can't because when I put this ad at the end of the Ted Kaczynski video, you guys sold out the entire stock in like less than 24 hours. And to that, I gotta say, thank you. That is incredibly encouraging. I put it as like an Easter egg at the end of the video that the posters were available on Halloween. And on Halloween night, you guys bought 100 that just had my writing at the bottom of it. I feel unappreciative sometimes of just how good you all have been to me. But I want you to know I do appreciate it. It hasn't lost its newness. the level of, I guess, attention I get, the level of blessings that you all have given me. It really does mean a lot. So thank you. And thank you for the support. This is already shown in just the little teasers I've put out of it. But yeah, if you're interested, link to this will be in the description. Get it while you can. But really, from the support you guys have already shown, I couldn't ask for anything more. It means the world. So sincerely, thank you. With all that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get into the breakdown. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you for watching. It really does mean the world. For the first few episodes, I want to talk about how a new series builds itself up. So we're going to go back and forth between the two. Eventually, I'll probably finish off The Painter and then do Greylock, just because The Painter is a shorter series. But at least in the beginning, let's kind of leapfrog. So let's begin with the first episode of Greylock. Tape 1 of Greylock is titled Back Online. We hear the electronic voice of a computer begin to speak as someone reboots the system. The computer identifies itself as being from a company called Semiodyne. That doesn't mean anything to us now, but it will later. The cameras within this facility begin to boot up, and we see what seems to be several empty and abandoned spaces. Everything from laboratories to office rooms seems to be desolate. Someone tries to get into the computer system but fails before overriding the system with an administrator access. This, in combination with the abandoned rooms and sounds of alarms blaring, implies that something very bad has happened here. Every now and then, the camera will try to switch to the morgue's camera, which simply displays the error message, "Fatal error, morgue offline, contact technician." Whoever overrided the system performs a data extraction, and when this data extraction is complete, the video ends. All that this really gives us is some setup as far as the name Semiodyne, some kind of emergency causing a bunch of people to evacuate, a data extraction being performed, whatever that means, and something involving a morgue has gone wrong. While this does give us some clues about the setting of Greylock, it doesn't tell us a lot off the bat as far as, what the direction of characters is going to be, what the scares are going to be. The first episode's pretty devoid of any kind of fear other than just general tension. But it does give us some kind of setup as far as these large facilities being involved and a sense that some great event has taken place. So with Greylock out of the way, let's talk about the first episode of The Painter. Again, while UrbanSPOOK is the name of the YouTube channel that The Painter is on, Urban has clarified that The Painter is the name of the current ongoing series. The first episode of The Painter is titled Faces, and the description says that these are tapes found in an apartment complex basement. The primary method of communication in The Painter is through a black screen with white text, with occasional images appearing to supplement that text. While this can get repetitive, it in and of itself isn't a problem as long as you do interesting things with it. The text says that 6 months ago, police found 3 paintings in an abandoned storage area. These paintings correlated to recent murders. One murder was of a woman named Carla who was stabbed 36 times and had all of her teeth removed. And if you heard just that and thought, oh, well, that's kind of a heavy description just out of the gate, you are in for something. The painting that correlates to this murder is called Carla's Teeth. The following descriptions play out in a similar fashion. A woman was found stabbed in a bathtub. Her painting was called Floating Jackie. A man's face was removed. His painting was called James's Secret Face. The text then says that 2 months later, more paintings were found. A slideshow of the paintings appear, and if you slow it down and read all of it, there are some anomalies, which we will discuss later. The police also received 3 photos of murder victims, James and Jackie being 2 of the murders that were mentioned earlier. The text then urges anyone who has any information regarding this case to please call the number shown here. It then says that one final painting called Self-Portrait was found 2 days ago, and we get a painting of what is supposedly our killer. And with that, Faces ends. Now, a lot out of the bait. You're kind of gobsmacked with a lot of information really quickly. There is a serial killer who is apparently making paintings of the people that they murder. These murders are absolutely brutal, and the paintings seem to be almost mocking the condition of death. And then furthermore, at the very end of the video, we get a painting of what this killer might look like. This devilish, impossible figure. And personally, at least if we're comparing the two, I think the painter has a stronger start. Sure, it's not perfect, it's got its issues, like it says the whole 6 months ago and then 2 months later and then 2 days ago thing is kind of like tripping over itself with all the dates, but at least it's linear, it flows in one direction. And the immediate brutal descriptions of these deaths can be pretty off-putting, but for a cold open, it could work. It kind of gives the implication there's going to be this whole series of interesting crimes and murders told about through the series, and we're just peeking our head into the aftermath of it. And introducing the killer as this almost supernatural figure at the end means that the series could move in a pretty cool direction. We're immediately given an antagonist, a threat, and a situation. And from the first episode, the painter has a lot of potential. Will it live up on that potential? Well, you're just going to have to find out. Again, that's not to say Greylock's opening's bad by any means. It does what it wants to do. I just think that the painter's is a bit more powerful. Another important thing to mention about the painter is the assets from the first episode of Greylock are pretty cool. The empty rooms that the camera's painting around and whatnot are interesting. But what's really interesting is the actual paintings of the painter. The creator of the series, UrbanSPOOK, has been very clear that he created the series in order to advertise his own artwork. And I can see why. The dude does a great job at painting horrific images, especially faces. And the first thing that a lot of people noticed about faces, and I think one of the main reasons that the story is still beloved by a lot of people, is by how gripping the artwork actually is. We're not going to do a whole points thing because that's lame and reductive to the stuff I'm trying to say, but if I figuratively had to give a point one way or the other for your intro, it would be to the painter. So we have our setups for both, but now I want to get into their second episodes, which is where Greylock really shines. Now, of course, this goes without saying for every series that I cover, but I just want to mention it now. The links to both of these series will be in the description, and what's coming up in Greylock is very special. So I would hate for your entire experience of the series as it stands to date to be ruined by my analysis of it. I highly encourage you to go check out the series for yourself, enjoy it, come back, and then we can discuss it. Because episode 2 of Greylock is what got me hooked on the series in the first place. Tape 2 of Greylock is titled To the Mountain. The episode begins with dash cam footage of someone driving down a snowy road at night. As the vehicle is driving, we can hear a sermon being played over the radio. In this sermon, the preacher speaking refers to the lion and Satan and his plan to destroy humanity. This minister tells us to be vigilant because the lion is constantly on the prowl, looking for whoever he may destroy.
We are not to enter the thicket in search of the lion. We may pay dear.
At some point, whoever's driving this car stops, gets out, and begins to carry the camera through the snow-laden woods. That is until suddenly, whoever's filming runs across a patch of blood. A distorted and eerie broadcast begins to play over the video we're watching. However, to those paying attention, the speaker is telling us that a group of hikers came across a ghastly scene while hiking through the mountain. What they initially believed to be a destroyed animal carcass was revealed to be something far more grisly when a human skull was found in the remains. This is intercut with the camera viewing blood across the snow and visual distortion and glitches whenever anything is focused on. Eventually, whoever's recording begins to see something around a tree, and after trying to follow whatever this thing is, the camera cuts and we are now back in the car. The car is moving very slowly until it stops and the driver begins to switch from the high beam to the low beam. It's as if the driver's trying to focus on something that's just off camera. The tension begins to build until suddenly,
You should make it easier on yourself and accept what it is that he bestows upon you.
there's a loud bang and the driver begins to drive out of the woods as fast as he can. As he does, the sermon of the devil becomes distorted and we end on the line, "The devil has a plan for you." Now, if I didn't do it justice, those who have actually watched the series can attest to how well paced this episode is. We know that there's some kind of facility, something responsible for whatever Greylock's about, but this is our first tangible feature of it. Someone driving through the woods at night, a grisly murder in the mountains, and something that makes all of it seem infeasible. The distortion in the blood, the thing behind the tree. And then that, in connection from what we know in the first episode, creates an air of mystery. And mystery is one of the things that Greylock does best. As we are given answers to questions we develop while watching the series, new questions are asked. And the flow of information is set to the point where it's rewarding to keep up what's going on, but also frustrating in the good way, in the way that you just want to keep watching more. The only explicit gore or horror that we get in this episode is blood on the ground and the mention of a skull. It doesn't need a lot of the violent components that the painter has, just the implication of violence. Because in the scenario that we're already asking ourselves questions as to what's going on, who's responsible, and why they're doing it, the implication is so much more creepy. On top of that, this episode begins to set up something else Greylock will get across very well, and that's its theme. It's not wholly apparent yet, but that sermon we heard in the car is going to be very relevant to the theme of the series as we go on. And no, not to say that the entire plot is about angels and devils attacking humanity. Not everything has to be the Mandela Catalog. But it does speak to principles we'll see later, especially how the sermon on the approach to the scene of the crime, or the scene of the blood on the trail, was about how we need to watch out for the devil, how the devil is looking to destroy us, so we should be careful and rely on God. But then after contact was made, after the banging on the car and the driver tries to get away, the sermon switches to the devil has a plan for you, almost as if it's inevitable now because you've strayed too far off the path. This warning of hubris is going to be a constant throughout the series. So it's nice that all the way back in episode 2, we have some groundwork laid for it. So with that out of the way, let's see what the painter does for its second episode. The second episode of The Painter is titled The Lighthouse. It begins by saying that 4 weeks ago, a police officer named Bill Collins, his wife, and 2 daughters went missing. As a matter of fact, Bill was the officer that found the self-portrait from episode 1 in his home. When the police go to search his house, it says that they found his 2-month-old daughter dead in the attic. And then 12 days after that, they found the family car abandoned by the ocean with a painting inside of it called Long-Necked Angel, which was a depiction of the aforementioned daughter's death. And we get to the first big thing with the painter that everyone speaks negatively about with it, and that is the shock value. Now, I'm not going to talk about how bad the shock value for the series gets right now, because there's a much better example of that waiting us in just a couple episodes. But I will talk about how the series knows that its primary thing is shock value, because that's kind of all it bases itself on. But it seems like all of that was just said in that order to be like, haha, here's a painting of a dead baby. Be scared. But it comes so abruptly that it breaks the pacing you previously had. A family goes missing. You go to search for them, and then you can get to the scary stuff that happens. But to be like, family goes missing, also one of them's dead, here's a picture of it, that's scary. Anyway, they're still missing, so they go look for them. It kind of breaks up the flow of everything. Anyway, after this, the search continues. It says that near the abandoned car, the police search leads them to an old lighthouse. On the front door of the abandoned lighthouse, there is the painting of a face. Stepping into the lighthouse, the charred corpse of a man named Daniel Williams was found. No, Daniel Williams is not the guy they're searching for. This is an unrelated body in the lighthouse. Apparently, there are a series of tunnels underneath the lighthouse, so the police go down there and find the bodies of Jennifer White and Lisa White, a mother and daughter, that are just lying down in the tunnel. And then they come across a barrel of meat and bones, as it's described, that after quote-unquote testing turns out to be the 3 remaining members of the Collins family. And then it says that around the barrel were several photos of the family before death. But then a 4th photo of an unknown face is shown, which of course is implied to be our killer. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. Like I said, I'll talk about all of the disturbing stuff later, because there's better examples of it. But the thing that I want to focus on right now is the first con I would definitively give the series, and that's its, what I'm going to call stage direction. Currently, it seems like the pacing of the story is purposeless other than directing us towards another grisly scene. And while in other places in the series, it's certainly to get to very grisly, like murderous scenes, here it just mentions that the first guy found was a charred corpse, and the other 2 aren't even described with how they died. It just says they're dead. Now, this isn't entirely purposeless. What it's doing is telling us that the killer has this lighthouse that they've used as a hideout for some time, so much so that there's several dead bodies strewn across it. And while not a lot is done with the bodies they come across, and the description of the movement through the lighthouse is super fast-paced in order to get to the ending really quick, it does serve the purpose of giving us more information that these killers are on the loose. However, that's not my biggest beef with this episode, because it's like, oh, your second YouTube horror short you uploaded has bad stage direction? How could you, right? Like, look, who really cares? The more interesting criticism to me in this episode is the scary face issue, or the scary face issue. Yeah, I guess that works. The scary face issue. And this isn't something that is unique to the painter. You see it in a lot of analog horror series. So most of us can agree that scary faces are typically good for things like jump scares or immediate frights, so to speak, but they rarely terrify us. Scary faces can be effective, but not by themselves. It's when the face carries an implication. Let's take an example we can all probably relate to. We've all probably seen a horror movie where there's a little kid who's talking to ghosts or demons or whatever, and they describe it to the parents as their imaginary friend or whatnot. And there's probably some scene in the movie where the parents come to the little boy or little girl and they look at a drawing, and the drawing looks something like this, right? You like this artist rendition? I made it myself. And then the parents may walk up to the little girl who drew this and say, oh, who's that? And the little girl may be like, oh, well, that's the scriggly man, but he says you can't see his face, or at least not yet. Now, let's think about this. Is the physical drawing of this, the red Sharpie that took me maybe 40 seconds to draw, and the few black scratches through it, is that scary? If I was to draw this on my hand and hold it up, is it freaky? No, of course not. What's freaky is the implication of what the kid's talking about. It doesn't matter what this shape actually looks like. It's the fact that there's a creature that, as the kid is drawn, is much, much larger than everyone else. Its skin and definitions is much more sharp and violent than everyone else, and the kid won't even make a rendition of its face. That makes you ask questions. That makes your brain start to put together the worst pieces it has at its disposal as to what the squiggly man might mean. So that's something we can all understand, right? So now let's apply it to an analog horror series that we're all familiar with. Let's apply it to the Mandela Catalog. When the original Mandela Catalog came out, I was frankly roasted, and it was funny, so I'll allow it, for my reaction to this image, to the alternate Gabriel's face, or the Germasus face, as the community so lightly put it. Because I did, and still do, find this face particularly scary. The reason that this face is so scary is because of the medium that it occurs in. This face appears in the middle of a cartoon for kids depicting the nativity scene. We have been given several references in the cartoon up until this point of what humans look like. And from our own colloquial knowledge, we know what humans look like in real life. So if we see these cute little rounded cartoon drawings of people, and we know what people look like, we connect the two in our heads. This is what the cartoon's rendition of what a person is. So if that's what people look like to the cartoon, then what does this thing look like? What does it mean that the cartoon says its eyes are taller than its head is supposed to be, and its smile is so wide that it wraps around its face? This, in combination with the music implying it to be some inversion of holiness itself, is frightening. It is not that the actual drawing of a couple Bugs Bunny eyes is scary, it's that it's indicative of something much, much worse. And that continues throughout the rest of the Mandela Catalog. Every time we see Gabriel since then, it's just the statue, not the altered form. Meaning the question's still out there, what does this alternate look like? And that's what I find myself thinking about. Not the horror of this image, but the horror of what the image might represent. And I thought that is what the painter was leading into. In the first episode, we're given a few paintings of how the killer depicted their victims. And then we're shown a few photos of what those victims actually looked like. And we're shown that there's some stark dissonance between the two. That one body looks like this, and the painting looks like something completely different. And if this was further elaborated on, I would be giving this praise. That's such a cool concept that even though we see a painting, even though we see what the killer thinks the murder looks like, thinks what the picture of it looks like in their head, it might not look anything like that. That could be really impressive. That could say something about the psychology of the killer. Perhaps there's some brutal murder that they depict as beautiful, for example. But then here in episode 2, it just says that these are actual photos of what the family looked like. And for one, I know that's not true because don't get me wrong, the paintings, the artwork, it's very scary, but that's not a photograph. I let it slide in the first one because I was hoping he wouldn't use photographs again, but the photographs are back, so now I have to call it out. And then with our fourth picture that is supposedly a picture of a killer, well, now we know what the killer looks like. It was cool when it was a self-portrait because maybe the killer doesn't look like that at all. Maybe that's just how the killer views themselves, right? But now we have a photograph and it's like, oh, that's it. Show's over, boys. Go home. It takes so much of the mystery and intrigue out of it by just saying, boom, here's a scary face. When it would have worked better for the psychology of everything I mentioned, as well as avoiding the scary face issue, as I've termed it, if you just said that these were paintings around the barrel instead of photographs. Because if the scary face isn't indicative of anything else, if these aren't drawings of what the killer thinks his victims look like, and these are just supposed to be the face the victim had, well then it's just a scary face, and there's nothing more to it. I agree that the artwork is the best part about the painter, but I want the artwork to mean something. I want it to stick with me, and I want it to be something that bothers me, rather than just a face that causes a mild twinge when you see it, and then nothing more. Will this be something that the painter overcomes in its future entries? I don't know, we're gonna find out. But Greylock is off to a very heavy second episode. Came out of the gate swinging, gave us the whole buildup of this evil element, the devil, the lion, so to speak. There's something happening in the trails around the snow-laden hills. And somehow this all connects back to a company called Semiodyne and some institution or laboratory that's fallen apart. So with those questions in our mind, let's move into the third episode. Tape 3 is titled Orientation Protocols. The opening of the tape tells us that it is government property and that this cassette was meant for someone named Alexander Michael Marsh. The tape tells us that Unit 13 of the United States Army and Semiodyne, the company we heard mentioned in the first episode, have collaborated together on something called Project Stargate. Now, Project Stargate was a real-world CIA project that happened back in the 70s and 80s. Basically, it was the government evaluating if there was any truth to telepathy or ESP or mind control or what have you. Officially, in the real world, Project Stargate turned up nothing, but in this series, it went on to do much, much more. In this series, Project Stargate began to research into something known as thought forms, also known as tulpas. If you've watched my channel for a while, you're probably familiar with tulpas. They've come up in a few different horror concepts that I've covered up until this point. But in case you haven't, a tulpa is effectively the manifestation of direct thought. In other words, if you concentrate on one specific thought or concept for long enough, that concept will become real. Tulpas are a belief within a lot of Eastern mysticism, so there is a lot more lore to them than what I'm explaining right now. But the short version is that there is a lot of ambient energy or spirituality or whatever you'd like to call it in our inherent atmosphere. And most of this inherent energy doesn't have anywhere to go. It just simply exists. But if you, the individual, use the power of your consciousness to think of a specific idea or shape for long enough, you effectively give that ambient energy a place to call home. Say, for example, a young child has an imaginary friend. This child has imagined what this friend looks like, what their name is, how they sound, what their likes and dislikes are. Eventually, the child imagines enough of the imaginary friend that it becomes a tangible, thought-out creature. The raw energy around us that is seeking a place to call home uses the power of our consciousness and thought to effectively fill out that form. So then the imaginary friend becomes real, not because the imaginary friend existed, but because the energy made it exist. At least effectively, this is the concept of tulpas that's being applied within Greylock. However, Greylock asks a far more sinister question. What if that ambient energy wasn't benevolent or didn't fit into whatever shape we assigned it? What if instead it had some ulterior motive? A motive to cause harm. Tape 3 also raises a very disturbing point, which has been theorized with tulpas before, that what if ghosts or specters or haunted locations or what have you are just tulpas? In other words, imagine you lost a loved one and you're grieving for that loved one and you're thinking about them constantly and you do it so much that eventually your loved one becomes real. Only it's not them, it's just energy in the shape of them. Or imagine a haunted building. If enough people believe that place to be haunted by a specific ghost, it will become haunted by a newly invented ghost. So, the United States government has learned about this process and immediately asked the question, how do we industrialize it? That's what this Project Stargate is. That's what Unit 13 is within Greylock. It is the powers that be trying to find a way to make these thought forms into something tangible and beneficial. Don't have enough workers in your factories? Just imagine a bunch of workers that you never have to pay. Political issues in the Middle East? Just have enough people imagine a giant mothership to just laze that into glass. Your citizens have a loneliness epidemic? Well, everyone gets to imagine and create their own designer goth mommy girlfriend. Of course, this is all hypothetical. The series didn't say it, but we all know where this is going. Now, actual thought forms or tulpas are a very involved and hard to create process that involves years and years of meditation and religious study and other things that the government does not have time for. So, someone named Dr. Bernard Hayes has come to oversee Unit 13. And Dr. Hayes has developed a machine known as the Thought Form Manifester. Because why take years to understand spirituality and the consequences of your actions when you just hook a guy up to a cable and just churn out automated soldiers? The Thought Form Manifester is a machine that you can attach an individual to and allow them to almost instantly create a thought form. You can create anything from a human to an animal to even the concept of an emotion. What this means is that there are some inherently negative thought forms, like for example, a childhood nightmare, or as shown on video, a giant spider. So to ensure only the right thought forms are used, all thought up thought forms, immediately go to a kind of isolation chamber, which the tape ensures us that is totally safe because there's no way they'll be able to break out of it. And with that, we have the ending of tape 3. Alright, so this gives us some answers, but again, asks more questions. We can now kind of see what Semiodyne and the government were up to. It gives some hint as to what the footage we saw in tape 1 might have been. But it also asks a lot of new questions, like, oh, okay, so people can just imagine stuff in this machine and create it. So literally anything could be out there. And the tape said that the government assures us none of these thought forms are harmful and that they're all docile, but we know to just throw that out the window. So it gives us a lot of world building and thoughts as to what our monsters might be. That's another pro that I'll give Greylock is its world building. It's slow enough that you don't really realize that you're taking in a lot of information about who the players are, what they're doing, what their goals are, because it flows so well with the narrative. But by the end of it, you have this established framework for how the world of Greylock works, and it all seems to connect together. It's very well done. So now, let's move on to The Painter, Episode 3. Episode 3 is titled In the Walls. It begins and says, 10 days ago, Corey and Margaret go missing. 5 days later, they... Again, it's I know that it's harder to do a text-based series without just doing stuff like 10 days ago this happened, and 5 days ago this happened. But there are other ways to do it. Sure, if you don't have access to a ton of visuals, which I totally understand, it can be more constraining to just telling a story through text. But other people have done it without just listing off dates and locations. It says that the top half of Margaret and the bottom half of Corey were sewn together. There was a brick in the throat of Margaret that was labeled with the word meat, and that Corey's lower half had something ripped off I'll let you guess what that something is. And then it says that 1 week before they disappeared, Corey was dared by 2 of his friends to go inside of a remote cabin. I guess that's what 11-year-olds are up to nowadays. And that while inside of the cabin, he took a lot of pictures and then said he saw a scary face and ran out with bruises on his arm. So the police go to investigate the cabin for some reason, and they find the camera, and boom, wouldn't you know it, scary face of the killer. Okay, so let's start with the stuff I've already talked about. Direction, all over the place. 10 days ago, they go missing. 5 days later, they got found, also known as 5 days ago. But a week before they originally went missing, so the 10-day-ago mark, which means 17 days ago, the 11-year-old was hanging out with his 11-year-old friends and got dared to go inside of a cabin. And then he takes a bunch of pictures. Oh yeah, there's a cabin, by the way. He takes a bunch of pictures in this cabin. I assume after the murder, the police somehow find out about this cabin. So then they go to the cabin, find a camera, and then the camera has a scary face. Now, I know the whole direction for this was to get to that end point, that scary face in the camera, but why was the killer just in an abandoned cabin that just got brought up? Didn't kill the kid, didn't attack him, like, they were just like hanging out in there, and the kid saw him, and the killer bruised the arm, then the kid gets away. So what, could the killer not catch an 11-year-old child? And they run away, but then the killer comes back 7 days later to kill Corey and his twin sister, and then do all the gross murderous stuff, I guess. Again, the story is just sprinting as fast as it can to get to gross disturbing thing happen here, scary face, the end. Like, it couldn't tell us that in order and then save the gross out murder whatever for the ending, because it had to tell us in the beginning. Like, 10 days ago they go missing. Anyway, 5 days ago they were found and they were bloody and they were cut up and blah blah blah. Now, this is the part of the series that everyone who has been a vocal critic of it, which has been a lot of people, everyone who's been a vocal critic of the series has honed in on the one detail from this episode. And I get it. I understand what the commotion's about. And that is regarding the shock content of this episode. So you may have noticed at the beginning when it shows Corey and Margaret, they are twins who are both 11 years old. And if you go back to the first episode and see what the painting of Corey was, it implies a level of sexual violence. And that's to put it nicely. Also, that's one thing I forgot to mention. In another case, I would like if the series like showed us a lot of the aftermaths of crimes before they happen. Like, it shows us paintings that don't mean anything to us now but will mean something to us later when we hear about the murder. That's cool in theory, but not when it's just used for just slapping us in the face. And like I said at the beginning, I don't care about debating the ethics or what's allowed to be for fictional horror or whatnot. When we talk about like real horror, like showing real people dying and stuff, that's different. I do think there should be a pretty, staunch line on that. But I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say that there's a line of stuff you can't talk or tell stories about. Some of my favorite stories have incredibly dark and grisly concepts. And a lot of the times, my favorite stories use that to enhance the subject matter, to make things quite good. The reason I think everyone's so mad with it, and the reason I don't think it was a good idea for the series, is because of its haphazard addition. It's not that the material is impossible, it's that you're just using it as more material. I would argue that I don't think there's ever a YouTube analog horror series that could get away with doing that in the first place, but even if there was, this ain't it. Because here, all that it's doing is the equivalent of trying to jump scare the audience. It's just saying, ooh, isn't this shocking? Isn't this scary? Look at it, look at it. And that's all it's got. Because as soon as you peel that away, as soon as the shock of it doesn't work on you, the series is just a line of moments that lead up to something disturbing happen, line of text, another disturbing thing, end. So naturally, if it's going to be effective, if it's going to hold your horror, to not realize the flaws that the writing has, then it's got to be something loud and crazy. And to be honest, it kind of worked. Like, sure, every now and then I'll see someone be like, the series is lame, the series is boring, what have you. But most of the time, the reason people complain about the series is because of how graphic and awful and bloody it is and stuff like that, which is what the creator wants, right? He's trying to make shock content. People being shocked is the end goal. So in a sense, his strategy kind of worked. If your strategy is to flashbang people and that's all they take away from it, then mission accomplished. And you know what? I'm going to write shock content in blue just to hammer that in. That, yeah, I think it's a bad idea. Didn't enjoy it, but I guess that's what people took away and that was your goal. So, Yahtzee. So, if your purpose is to get your artwork out there, if it's just to be scary and you just want people to walk away with the only thought in their mind that, oh, those paintings were freaky, then of course you're going to make it as loud and gross and over the top as possible. And from what I've seen, it seems to work. There are a lot of people who really like The Painter. A lot of people who I think wouldn't enjoy it if it wasn't so over the top. The reason I came across the series is because I had people in my comments and my live streams everywhere telling me over and over that I have to check out the series, that it's the scariest analog horror series. A lot of people said it's the best analog horror series on the market today. That's why really at the end of the day, any criticism that I'm giving the series is just a thought exercise because the series has succeeded at what it set out to do. Again, a lot is banking on this shock content being a positive because otherwise it's just kind of boring. But we'll see if UrbanSPOOK pulls out of that while we continue on to the next part of Greylock. After being told what thought forms are and Semiodine's true nature and Unit 13, Project Stargate, all of that, we now move into Tape 4, Unexpected Visitors. Tape 4 opens with camcorder footage taken from outside of a house at night. Whoever is recording waits for the occupants of the house to go to sleep before checking various entries into the house, eventually climbing through a window. As the home intruder makes their way through the house, they eventually come to the bottom of a staircase. When the camera looks up the staircase, the video cuts out, and we hear what sounds like someone screaming in the midst of a fight before the camera cuts back on, and it seems that the home intruder is now walking around outside once again, before gazing up at a full moon before the footage ends. Now, I think I know what is going on in this video. You may see this initially and think maybe it's a thought form or some kind of evil entity breaking into someone's house to kill them. And while you may be correct in that, that's not my theory. But my theory won't make any sense right now, so we'll talk about it later. We then see an advertisement for an episode of Max Headroom, which allows us to pinpoint the day of this broadcast as October the 8th, 1987. And you'll find out why 1987 specifically in a couple episodes. However, as the broadcast is being shown, an emergency service broadcast takes its place. The broadcast is for Northern Berkshire County, Massachusetts. The broadcast says that there have been 49 home invasions in the past night alone, and that these home intruders who have not yet been identified are incredibly violent, and that anyone who is currently home should immediately hide and, as a last resort, fight. It is so bad that the broadcast says if you are not home currently, do not return home. Instead, make your way to local marts which have been transformed into safe havens. Whatever's going on in Berkshire County is so bad that local mini-marts have been turned into outposts for people to escape their houses to. As the situation is being explained, we cut to what seems to be another camcorder this time, who is listening to the television broadcast as they tighten down security at their own home. However, it seems that it is too late because as the homeowner reaches back into his house, something reaches in to attack him, and it seems that the homeowner was killed by whatever these faces are. For one, the faces that get shown there at the end are pretty gnarly. From these zombified figures to these ghastly eyeless creatures. It's horrifying to imagine that dozens, if not hundreds of these things are attacking homes at random throughout Berkshire County. So are all of these creatures thought forms? Or is there something else going on in the area that we just don't know about yet? I'll go ahead and spoil it for you and say that it's the latter. And because of that, none of my analysis would make sense for right now, so we'll just keep moving on. But just know that whatever is happening in this county, it's affecting everyone. But before we get to the next episode of Greylock, let's continue with The Painter. Episode 4 of The Painter, titled The Clue, opens by telling us that private investigator Sean Kane, another new character, has been helping police with the recent murders. Sean Kane had recently found the body of someone named Tom Harris, another new character. Is Tom Harris a character that is being introduced for plot development, furthering the stakes, or dare I say, depth? No, of course not, because in the next slide it says that Tom Harris just died. It says the killer climbed up to Tom's room and, I'm not kidding, coated his entire body in a giant pile of wax. But oh, not only that, dear viewer, while in the giant melted wax, he had his arms cut off. And there was also a third arm in there, and they don't know whose it is. But then, 1 week after Tom Harris was found, Sean Kane, the guy I mentioned earlier, disappeared. Why is it formatted that way? Why did you tell us, hey, there's this investigator named Sean Kane, he found this really grisly murder. Anyway, so Sean Kane goes missing, he's in a really grisly murder. Like, why not just start back here, and then whatever. When the police go to Sean's house, they find that his dog was still alive, but they broke all of the dog's legs. Be disturbed. And that Sean had painted a number 2 on the wall in his own blood. Now, this on its own is interesting, right? There's a private investigator who's getting murdered, and in his last moments, he uses his own blood to write out the number 2. Now, what do you think that means? Exactly, it means there's 2 killers. It's kind of cool and makes sense for a cop in his final moments to draw out the one clue he could give them so quickly, that there's 2 of them. Now, why would the killers who have been this careful to elude police allow him to just write that? I don't know, maybe they wanted him to see it, maybe I'm looking too far into the series that doesn't care. But regardless, I like that touch. I wish that there was more things like that within the story, because then I'd be more invested. If characters did smart stuff, or if the plot developed through these horrific murders we read about, rather than it just being horrific murders we read about, then I would care. Sean's body's never found, but they find a painting of him titled The Man in the Pipes, which means he's probably in the pipes, but I guess they just never checked. And then it says that Sean had a security camera that took a picture of the killer as the killer was making their way into the home, which gives us this image. Again, this isn't a painting of the killer, this is just a picture. So once again, scary face issue, apply here. I also want to clarify that all this stuff's just my opinions. It's just the stuff I look for in stories, and there's probably a couple people who agree with me, but you could totally disagree. Maybe you see this face and it kept you up for days and days on end, or any of the other faces in this series, and for that reason, this series is vastly superior to this one to you. And I have absolutely no argument. Enjoy it. I hope that you enjoy it. The link to it's in the description. Help yourself. Again, this video is all just my opinion, so I'm giving you my opinion as to why it doesn't work, and why seeing just another picture of the killer doesn't do anything for me. So once again, characters introduced, they get killed, but we do get the cool idea that there's 2 killers. That adds a bit of variety, a bit of spice of life, if you will, to the whole ordeal. Both of these series have had a very limited amount of time to tell their stories, and both of them have used it in very different ways. So with that, let's get into episode 5 of Greylock. And episode 5 is where it gets really weird. That's because take 5 of Greylock is not here, not now, not anymore. And for the first time, we get a description that reads, "Do you know what they did up there? These are the consequences." What is up there? What are the consequences? Well, I'm glad you asked. The video begins with audio of a woman at an ultrasound appointment. We will come to learn that this expectant mother's name is Tiffany. Tiffany begins to speak to the ultrasound technician and says that her, and especially her husband, have wanted this child for a really long time. Tiffany says that it's expected to be a healthy baby boy, and they plan to name him Max. So the ultrasound appointment begins, and at first, everything seems fine. However, suddenly, a glitch appears in the monitor of the ultrasound, and if you pause the glitch on just the right frame, we can see a newspaper headline for Berkshire County mentioning the series of strange events occurring around the county and how the authorities are powerless to do anything, or at least powerless to speak on it. When the ultrasound screen comes back on, the baby is gone. And no, not like the image of the baby is now gone. Everything else around the womb itself can still be visualized, but the baby has just disappeared. Both of them remark that this is bizarre, and the technician steps out into the hallway to try another machine. However, as the technician's out in the hallway, she begins a conversation with someone else, which might imply the same thing has happened to another person, as both voices seem to be confused around what just transpired. Tiffany begins to panic and cry before a newspaper fades in saying that Tiffany Crisaldi died at the age of 29 shortly after the loss of her unborn child. So, what on earth does this mean? So we've got thought forms, we've got those mind creations running around somewhere. We've got the company Semiodyne and whatever they're up to. We've got stuff just running into people's houses and killing them, which we can probably assume is related to the blood that was found on the trails onto the mountain. But now we have phantom pregnancies. And no, not like the actual medical phantom pregnancies, like a pregnancy that becomes a phantom. Not only that, but Tiffany died shortly after this took place. Now, it is quite possible that her death was by her own doing. And I do think it is, and that point will be backed up with information that occurs later in the series. But it was undoubtedly because her mind broke at this impossible circumstance. And also, keep that description in mind. Do you know what they did up there? These are the consequences. We can assume the disappearing pregnancy to be the consequences, but what does it mean by up there? What happened? There's two other things I want you to note in this episode. For one, as the newspaper fades out, we zoom in on Tiffany's face and it becomes more and more evil, or like there's some sinister nature to her. Again, that's something that will be expanded on later in the series. But the far more interesting thing is the name of her husband / boyfriend / baby daddy that is mentioned in the newspaper article detailing her death. Because there it says that her husband's name is Alexander Marsh. And if that sounds familiar, that is who tape 3, the orientation protocol, was intended to go to. Why was Alexander Marsh, the husband of a woman who just went through a disappearing pregnancy, given a tape about thought form manifestation? I believe I have the answer for that, but before I mention it, let's get to the next episode of The Painter. I know, the Greylock series is getting really good, and I'm really excited to talk about it, but I've already got this far into the format, I can't give up now. Episode 5 of The Painter is titled The Witness. It says that 3 days ago, again, dates, times getting thrown everywhere, but whatever. 3 days ago, Tina Rosenberg was reported missing along with her boyfriend Jack and younger sister Flora, and that Jack's car was found abandoned 2 days ago. A painting was found at the car titled Flower Face Flora. Police walk through the woods and find Tina still alive with her feet and arms removed. Why would you remove just the feet? Why not the legs? Whatever. But still alive while tied to a log. Next to her was her younger sister Flora, who had been killed with a hammer. We also see a picture of what Flora looked like. Jack is nowhere to be seen, so the police escort Tina out of the woods, and when they pass Jack's car again, there is now another painting. This painting is titled Long Jack. And see, here they do it right. We don't see Jack anywhere else. We just see this painting, and it leaves up to the imagination of, oh, that's kind of creepy. I wonder what this means. I wonder what the translation of this image titled Long Jack means to what actually happened to Jack. Like, you did it right here. Just do the same thing everywhere else. Tina gives a recounting of events, stating the things I just mentioned, also mentioning the fact that they were injected with something. A lot of these murders involve injections of some kind. And then finally, Tina gives a police sketch of the killer. This lining up with images that we've seen earlier. So again, the police sketch doesn't hold a ton of weight because at this point we've been shown the killer so much that it's just another image. So once again, another episode of The Painter that is just listing new people we just met, and then they die. And Tina didn't die. She got her witness statement, the sketch and all that, but she effectively died because she doesn't show up in the story anywhere else. So all that we got, I mean, we see a painting of Tina somewhere else, which doesn't make sense because she's alive, but whatever. We see a painting of Tina somewhere else, but she's effectively dead to the narrative. So it was, again, here's 3 characters. They all die. I wonder what the next episode will be. And as a matter of fact, I can't talk about the next episode, or really the next few after that, because I think what happened is I think UrbanSPOOK broke. Because again, after the mention of the twins in episode 3, people got really mad. And rather just keeping his head down, sticking with it, doing what he's doing, he decided to hammer the gas. Because episode 6 and on is just the most messed up stuff he could possibly put in his mind. And what really breaks my heart about it is in these last few episodes, there are some really cool moments. There's really cool potential that UrbanSPOOK could pull off, and I think he should pull off, but it's drowned out by this weird kind of vitriol he has against people who don't like disturbing stuff. And you know what? Because I don't really have a lot more to say about it that hasn't already been said, and also the story of Greylock is getting really good and I want to focus on it, why don't we just go ahead and finish out the rest of the stuff I have to say about UrbanSPOOK. Because I'm not going to give a play-by-play of the upcoming episodes, at least not in super detail, because you'll see. But let's just go through the basic plot beats of number 6 to give you an idea. In episode 6, titled Pigs, it begins by saying an elderly couple went missing on their farm. You don't need to know their names because it's not important. The wife was found tied to a mattress in the barn with her hands ripped off, and the death involved a horse. Their granddaughter's head was found in a blanket, and what's really funny about that isn't the dead child. That's not what I meant. What's really funny about this is the granddaughter is mentioned nowhere else in the episode or the whole series until the same frame that talks about her head being found. So it's literally like this elderly couple went missing. During the search, the granddaughter's head was found. Like, where? What? She was missing too? You didn't tell us that part. So granddaughter's head's found in a blanket, and then they go into the barn and there's faces nailed to the walls of the barn. Ooh. And then also there's a bunch of decapitated pig carcasses. But then there's a really big pig that has had, I'm not kidding, its eyes pulled out and the eyes of the granddaughter put into the pig's eye sockets. And then inside of the pig is the old man who got like shoved into the pig, and then they sewed the pig back together. We get some paintings of everyone. Something I do want to mention is that the thumbnail for this video, and also the painting shown here, is the painting of Ian, called Ian the Pig. Again, the old man that was shoved inside of the pig carcass. This video was originally taken down and age restricted and whatnot because the original painting here depicted male nudity. We're also shown a slideshow of future killings. So in other words, it's a bunch of paintings that are gonna pop up down the line. And again, I like this in concept. I wish more was done for it, because it lets your mind wander as to what these paintings might mean. It builds some tension, it builds some mystery. I like this aspect of it. But it's then immediately followed up by an aspect I don't like when we get what seems to be a tape of the killer sliding into frame. And again, since this is video of the killer, scary face issue, blah, blah, blah. We're going to do the same thing with the next one in the series, episode 7, titled Family. It says, over the past few days, the murders got bad. A school teacher named Isabel Jackson called the police. However, the address that she gave the police was not to her own house for some reason. The address that the police did go to involved the murder of 2 parents, Janice and Paul, and their son Zeke, and also Janice was pregnant. So, given that last mention of the pregnancy, you can imagine what happens in the Painter series. So, the child that was once inside of mom was forcefully no longer inside of mom. Zeke is never seen again, but given the painting that we had in the previous episode called like Headless Zeke or whatever, we can assume what happened to him. Paul is killed by having a piece of the baby put in his mouth, be disturbed. When the police do eventually get to Isabel's house, because remember this whole thing was set off because a teacher called the police but gave the wrong address for some reason. Isabel said that she came outside to find her husband dead and then went and locked herself in the bathroom. How she had time to give the wrong address or mention the details of finding him and all that in the time mentioned, whatever. Also, in the time all of this happened, the killers had time to put a painting of her husband Bruce next to his body where his head is supposed to be. But at this point, I'm pretty sure the killers are supernatural, so we can run with it. Isabel was killed by a power drill to the head. In the aftermath of this carnage, the police came across 2 sets of bloody footprints. Now, while we already knew that there were 2 killers because of the whole 2 thing written on the wall, I guess the police just found out here. But after seeing the 2 from the private investigator, you would think that they would assume that's what that means. But either way, they got confirmation that there are 2 killers by the aftermath of this crime scene. And you know how I mentioned that it's so frustrating? Like, if this series was just exclusively the text and then scary stuff happens and then scary face, like, who cares, right? But there's moments where it does something cool, and I want to appreciate those moments because I think Urban Spook is a talented painter. I think Urban Spook's a talented artist, and I would love to see that talent get used for something more. Again, he says that it's just to sell shirts, and what does he care about story, blah, 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 even though I don't believe him that he doesn't care, because he definitely does care. But why not use that for something more? If you've got the talent, make it into something. Because the scene of Isabel's phone call with the police is pretty good. She's locked into her bathroom, the killers are breaking down the door with a power drill, it's a heavy, intense moment, and the voice acting, the audio work, all of it captures that perfectly.
Isabel, do you have anything to defend yourself with? Okay, listen, stay calm. I don't know what it is in your bathroom. Isabel? Hello? Isabel?
It is mean, it is ferocious, it is loud, it is in your face. It's everything that Urban Spook is trying to get across through the whole series, only this time, for one, it doesn't involve a painting or a scary face, and 2, it actually works. It gets the emotions across that he's trying to, and it's through its implication. More stuff like this to elevate what I think is good pieces of artwork. And that leads into another thing that I truly like about Urban Spook, and that's his sound design. All of the music from the entire series, as well as the audio elements that we've heard sprinkled throughout, are all done by him. He makes his own music for this stuff. And similar to the paintings, the sound design is good stuff. Sure, every now and then it will have these moments that are kind of jump scare adjacent or whatever, but a lot of the times he uses them accurately to build tension, to build fear in the scene. Like I said, this scene was all audio and it was the best part of the series. There is talent on display here. It's just so buried under all the edgelord. And to finish it off, let's talk about the last episode, or at least talk about as much as I talked about the last couple episodes. The last episode of The Painter to date, titled Meet. It opens saying, over the past week, there's been more murders. Then it says that a Dr. Fred Baker was found dead in his home, and that Fred's body was found after his face was rubbed off with sandpaper, and then vile stuff happened to a cat, also involving sandpaper. And then 2 days after that, someone named George White was found in their house, stabbed 487 times, but some of the stab wounds had traces of a different kind of stabbing, if you catch my drift. But during the autopsy, 3 photographs were found inside of George White's body. And of course, these photographs are more scary faces. It then says that last night, Sarah and Michael Stone got abducted from their home, but that thankfully they had a security camera on their front porch that for the first time got footage of the killers. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, well, 7 and a cat, mentioned right there, who all showed up and then died. I'm kind of cheating a bit. I'm counting the 3 photos as 3 different people. I believe they're like murder victims that we've seen earlier, but whatever, you get the point. Here's character you just met. Now they're dead. Here's all the brutal details. Next scene. I do kind of like the very ending of this. I was ragging on it, and I still am a bit, about the whole scary face issue, that just showing these images of the killer as photos isn't that scary, because you're just saying, oh, that's what they look like and there's nothing more to it. But seeing the drawings move in a live action background is kind of creepy. I could see how it could be used to more effect later. I can't make any comments on it right now, but after just seeing this little snippet, it's kind of cool if you had like human elements, like, you know, more realistic actual live action stuff, or not live action, you know what I mean. The drawings are depicted to look completely normal in the same room and setting with these things. It could be pretty cool. But again, as with everything else in the series, it is potential buried under everything else. At the end of the day, UrbanSPOOK was selling t-shirts with these scary faces on them before the series even began, and then just retooled a lot of his artwork into the series to advertise for it. UrbanSPOOK has also said that his favorite genre of movie is old slasher films. He loves the old 80s over-the-top bloody movies, and you know what? So do I. And while it's clear that's where the series started, at some point, again, in response to criticism, I believe, he just started looking for ways to push people's buttons, ways to make more and more people upset. And to be honest, maybe that works for him. Maybe the type of audience that would buy his shirts or his merchandise or what have you are the people who are happy to see other people get upset. There could be a lot of people watching right now who are happy that a series is pushing everyone's buttons and making them mad. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that he doesn't care. When he says, oh, I've never seen analog horror, oh, I don't care about the story, I'm just doing it to sell merch, he puts way too much time and effort into his paintings, way too much time and effort into the sound design, into scenes like the phone call scene, for him to just not care. I really think he does care. And it's not like the series is lost by any means. Sure, I wouldn't recommend this series to friends in public given the content that I've mentioned, but interesting stuff can still be done with the killers. UrbanSPOOK has said that after the Painter series is over, which has always been planned to be 10 episodes, mind you, so after 3 more episodes, it's done, that after 10 episodes, he wants to move into other aspects of internet horror. And I say more power to him. But he has talent, and I want to see it go somewhere. Artists aren't respected because they never get criticism. They're respected for how they handle said criticism. And overall, to everyone else, UrbanSPOOK is an interesting series that I'll be keeping up with, but sadly, I can't recommend it. However, that cannot be said for today's poster boy, Greylock. Greylock has had 5 incredible episodes of setup thus far, and episode 6 is where it went from a pretty cool analog horror series I was interested in into what has now become, honestly, one of my top 5 series of all time. It gets really, really cool, really, really fast. So let's get into it with Tape 6, Sleeping Dogs. Tape 6 also has a description which reads, "There came a red flash as it pitched from heaven. Corruption wrought truth. 0707. Now, while this phrase, at least to my knowledge, isn't explicitly biblical, it is indicative of things like Revelations. There's mentions in the book of Revelation of a red star falling from heaven, being a part of the end times. It also aligns with the thematic elements that we mentioned earlier. There is a devil here influencing what's happening behind the scenes, we just don't know what it is quite yet. Tape 6 opens with a lecture from Bernard T. Hayes, taken on October the 4th of 1981. Hayes, if you'll remember, is the director who was brought in to create the Thought Form Manifester. In a lecture he's giving on Jungian psychology and the development of the consciousness, Hayes says that his ultimate goal is to build upon what other scientists before him have created, and eventually climb all the way to heaven and look God in the eye as an equal. For one, this idea of building a tower to heaven is indicative of things like the Tower of Babel, and how man's hubris can be their own downfall, again connecting back to the themes we've seen throughout the series. But it also speaks to Hayes' personal goals. Hayes is so obsessed with being the master of creation that it seems he's willing to throw caution to the wayside. Or perhaps he sees other people getting hurt in the process as just the cost of doing business. From there, we are taken once again to a Semiodyne console. The user logging into the console is using the credentials of Frank Porter. Frank has a series of phone recordings in his console that are taken between March the 24th and March the 30th of 1987. These calls are from someone named Paul Morelli, the head of Morelli Construction. And it's at this point I should probably mention the real-world location where Greylock takes place, a mountain known as Mount Greylock. At the very beginning of the video, I mentioned that these were fictional events in a real setting. Mount Greylock is the tallest mountain in Massachusetts. It's known for its lookout towers, hiking trails, ski lodge, etc. Greylock is a famous travel destination in the Northeast and mentioned by a lot of early American authors. One of the most striking features on top of Mount Greylock is its Veterans War Memorial Tower, an image that you're going to see a few times in the series from here on out. So this gives us a few clues as to things we've heard about up until this point. This explains why episode 2 was called To the Mountain. The hiking trails that these murders were taking place on were on Mount Greylock. In the description of episode 5, when it says, "Do you know what they did up there is probably referring to the mountain as well. And here in episode 6, Paul Morelli's company has been hired to tunnel in to Mount Greylock itself. And I know this is like the second or third time I've said it at this point, but if you have not watched the series yourself, even if you've ignored all the previous statements I've given, and you've got this far, I am begging you, go listen to episode 6 on your own. The voice work is incredible, the build-up, tension, and payoff is great. This is when the series really took off, and I mean like took off more than it already had. So please don't ruin it here. Paul Morelli left a series of messages for Frank Porter.
Hey Frank, it's Paul Morelli. We ran into somewhat of an issue today.
It seems that Frank was the contact at Semiodyne who hired out Morelli Construction. Paul says that on the first day of burrowing, they ran into some weird old tunnels. And not just undocumented cave routes, these passages were instead filled with inscriptions and evidence of human contact. Paul says he's going to have some of his crew take a look at it and get back to work. The next day, Paul calls Frank again to say that the crew is getting sick. They can't figure out what it was, but a lot of people on site are beginning to get nauseous. Also, Paul seems confused because yesterday, when they got into the tunnel system, there was a massive collapse that blocked any travel forward. But then, as soon as they got to work on the 25th, the tunnel was suddenly cleared. Paul assumes that Frank had another crew come out for some reason and clear out the debris, because otherwise, how would a collapsed mountain of rock just disappear? From the previous call, Frank had sent out a photographer to take pictures of the site. Paul says that the photographer became so ill that he practically had to be carried out. But in taking the photographs and the deeper they got into the cave system, it went from just drawing on the walls to artifacts and vases and weapons laid out throughout the whole cave. Whatever this thing in Mount Greylock was, it meant a lot to a lot of people in some time now forgotten. Paul says that a member of his crew named Arnold Rivers is an anthropologist and specifically brought on sites like this to understand any artifacts they come across. Paul says that Arnold has been tasked to basically write up a report on everything they find, leave the site, and get it to Frank as soon as he can. Another thing that Paul mentions is that at night, several of the men on the crew say that something is moving in the tree line. The next day, Paul leaves Frank another message. This time, Paul is even more worried and nervous.
Something ain't right here. Crew's getting worse, more sick.
His voice is noticeably shaking. The confidence that he's had in the previous couple days seems to be waning. And this time, Paul saw the creature in the woods as well. He describes it as a tall figure, this dark shape that seems to be stalking them. At one point, Paul thinks maybe these are just conservationists who are trying to mess with the crew, but he doesn't seem to believe himself. Whatever's happening on top of Mount Greylock, it's beginning to get to him as well. The next day, Paul calls again, and things have gotten much worse. All of their food has become rotten. No one seems to be able to eat. It's like everything from their provisions to their minds are beginning to decay on top of the mountain. On top of that, everyone on the crew feels like the thing in the woods is stalking them and it's ready to attack at any minute. So as a countermeasure, they begin to set up cameras in the tree line. We see footage of these cameras when motion is detected, but to us, it seems like nothing's there. One message tries to play that says it's unavailable. However, as the message is glitching out, we see the label of Unit 13 over the screen. Perhaps this is saying whatever was recorded in this message has been immediately revoked by Unit 13 or the government's authority. We then see another view from one of the motion cameras. This time it seems like smoke or some vapor floats by the screen. The next day, Paul sends another phone call. And you know what? I'll just let you hear this one.
shit. Well, a lot of the crew here is sick now, and they're sort of like unresponsive. We tried emergency contacts for them, but they just keep ringing. The phones, they just kept ringing and ringing and ringing. Nobody picked up from any number we tried. Nobody picked up. No answer machines either. Made a call to the hospital, and same thing. Just ringing. Just tried 911, still nothing. I figured the phones were fucked up, but the machine actually picked up. I think I caught whatever's going around. My skin, it feels tight. A lot of pressure behind my eyes. My teeth feel like they're humming, vibrating. You know what? This all started when we came across that tunnel. I feel like I need to figure out what's down there. I think whatever's down there could help my crew, but most of all, I feel like something really bad's gonna happen if I don't go down, so I'm going down tonight.
Something in that cave is pulling them in. It is a force that is melting their minds and asking them to pour what's left of themselves into its caverns. At midnight that night, we see another image of what's on the motion camera. This seems to be a shape or void that was appearing in front of the camera but now drifts away. Very similar to the thought forms that we've seen earlier in the series. And finally, the last message for Frank Porter arrives on March the 30th. Although it doesn't seem that this is a recording from Paul Morelli, and is instead the sounds within the mountain relayed directly to him. A bundle of flesh and broken men is at the bottom of Mount Greylock, and whatever horrors were unearthed in its demolition have now been recklessly thrown to the world around them. We see the final image of the motion camera, which is simply some soulless, eyeless face gazing back at us. And with that, we have the end of tape 6. And let me be absolutely clear. I love this. This is so cool. It's so good. It's fantastic. We've had the buildup of weird supernatural events, things going on in the mountain, government agencies, but here we get a catalyst. We get a moment. A company known as Semiodyne, which we assume has some kind of nefarious interest, causes this unsuspecting construction crew to drill into the mountain, and it's not like monsters run out and kill them. No, it makes them the monsters. They become these rabid, soulless creatures that feel the need, like their skin is peeling off, like their teeth are about to fall out, and they need to go back inside of the mountain. And then that noise of what it sounds like in the caverns down there with them running around, oh, it's so good. It is such a fascinating concept. People talk a lot about things like Lovecraft, his application and his stories and stuff being used in future pieces of media. This is one of the best manifestations of like mind possession or some unspeakable entity causing people to worship it. This truly is Lovecraftian horror ported into the modern age. It's so good. And it's the first time out of anything we've talked about today that I'll definitively call it horror. Because sure, it's easy to be scary. Like, The Painter had a lot of that. You show a face, you get someone scared temporarily, or maybe even terrified. But being horrified is something completely different. It's something that sticks with you. It's something you think about. You think about the implications of what if you were one of those construction crew. The body horror of imagine it feels like your skin doesn't fit and your teeth are falling out, and you become the creature that we hear and only see a glimpse of at the end of the episode. And then you think how horrifying it would be to be a normal person down in those caves, to accidentally come across these stalking bands of monsters that were once human. And then of course you ask yourself the question, what is doing this to people? And is it capable of doing something even more? All of these questions leave you scared in a persistent way. It truly leaves you horrified. And I could sit here and gush about it all day, but if you've seen the series, you get what I mean. Greylock is an incredibly well done series that I want to see have so much more attention. Something else that I've saved to mention until now, because I wanted you to fall in love with the series before I gave like specifics about the creators or whatever. A lot of you probably remember Rob Dyke. He was one of the first people that got me into horror on YouTube. Funny enough, Rob Dyke had to change his name on YouTube because even though that is his last name, YouTube did not see it as such. So he had to change his name to Rob Gavigan on YouTube. Rob Gavigan is someone who I grew up with, someone who I can directly say is one of the reasons that I'm here right now making horror, scary videos on the internet or what have you. And anyway, this series, one of its main creators is Rob Gavigan. And it's so cool to see someone I grew up with, someone that I looked up to, now doing incredible, incredible work like this. And he's not the only one. I know there's a lot of people involved in the project, like Matt Reeves Productions. He stopped by on some of my live streams, said some very kind things. And I'm sure there's more people associated with it that I'm just not knowledgeable of. But hopefully you all will fall in love enough with the series that you go check them all out for yourself. But it was really cool for me to like this as much as I do, and then find out one of the people responsible is one of the people who is a reason for why I'm here right now. So it's really encouraging. So yeah, Greylock, 10 out of 10. It's so good. So let's keep going on with Tape 7, Back to Normal. This is a news broadcast on a station called News 13, potentially related to Unit 13, and the broadcast is of a show called Dawn Wright Tonight. The news anchor Dawn Wright tells us that it's been 2 weeks since the series of attacks that left the Berkshire County residents terrified. The attacks have since been blamed on an anti-government militia. But for those of us who actually saw the attacks and saw glimpses of what the attackers look like, we know that's not the case. There's interviews with local police officers backing up this point, and in the background of one of these interviews, we can see the aforementioned Veterans Tower on top of Mount Greylock. However, the screen glitches out, and the broadcast is seemingly hijacked by what is at first the image of 2 conjoined twins, and then we're shown 2 newspaper images. One of them is of Tiffany and Alexander. It's been a while, but they were the couple who had the pregnancy that just disappeared. In the other newspaper article, we see someone named Investigator Melgren talking about how he doesn't agree with what the police are saying and says there needs to be more transparency coming from the law enforcement. Whoever this Investigator Melgren is, it seems he's not buying whatever the police are saying. Keep that name in mind. We're going to see more of him later, and he also ties into a couple theories I have around the series itself. We then cut back to Dawn Wright's face after he said everything will go back to normal, before his face becomes heavily distorted with the label liar pasted across the screen. And with that, Back to Normal ends. So I don't think the conjoined twins are anything direct. I think it's more symbolism of like what happened to the babies and whatnot. I think the more important thing to pull out is that the police and news around the area are just saying that it was a freak accident and everyone should go back to life as normal. And while some people like Investigator Melgren don't buy it, some greater power at hand outright hates the news for spreading these lies. And we'll get more details on that level of hate in the next episode, Tape 8. Tape 8 is titled Old Odd Ends, and the episode picks up with the broadcast hijacking from Tape 7. We hear an argument between a series of executives and producers at the TV station. A producer says that the station was hijacked, but they don't know from where. As the producers are fighting among one another, one of them remarks that they can't get a hold of Dawn Wright. He went home and hasn't been heard since. So, one of the TV producers is sent out to get him. From there, we're taken to a semi-Odyne console, and specifically, taken to a file that the computer says should not exist. After this file is accessed, it is the personal log of Arnold Rivers. Arnold Rivers, if you'll remember, was the anthropologist who was a part of the Morelli construction incident. In his phone call, Paul said that Arnold took a bunch of pictures and records and then went home to put together a report to send Frank Porter. So while Arnold was there for a day, he didn't become a part of whatever happened to the rest of the crew. Arnold's personal log was recorded on April the 8th of 1987, a little over a week since the event at Mount Greylock. Arnold says that he now fears for his life and needs to leave some kind of recording of his recollection of events. Arnold recounts the story and says that after the initial debris was found laid across the trail inside the mountain, that Paul had the interior debris removed. Now, this is a discrepancy because in Paul's account of the story, Paul has no idea how the rocks got moved. And here in Arnold's account, Arnold says that Paul had the rocks moved. So either Paul was already undergoing some kind of psychosis and ordered the crew to remove the rubble and then wasn't conscious of making that decision, or Arnold just assumes that Paul did it because Paul's the boss of the construction site. Either way, some supernatural force led to the clearing of the cave. Arnold says that the relics found inside of that cave were the most incredible ever discovered in archaeology. Not only were there relics of pre-colonial and Native American culture as could be expected, but there were relics of Clovis and maybe even pre-Clovis cultures, which means it dates back to before the earliest known records of humanity in the Western Hemisphere. However, getting even deeper into the cave, more shocking discoveries were found. Despite this mountain being in Massachusetts, there were relics and writings from ancient Spanish, Roman, Chinese, Greek. Not only is it beyond remarkable that this many civilizations made their way to the Western Hemisphere in otherwise completely undocumented travels, but everyone from the Egyptians to the British filled the lower chambers of the mountain with gold and relics and artwork. Arnold makes the horrifying statement,
"Countless other things, but all of it was there purposely, as offerings."
Something in the mountain is so important that every tribe, every group of people that have ever existed have came here to worship it. And whatever God is hidden within this mountain, for some reason, has been forgotten by our textbooks. From here we cut to a locally broadcasted science show. The show says that before life on Earth existed, a planet collided with Earth, and pieces of that planet broke off into our near orbit and became the moon. But that other pieces of that planetary collision might still be left within the Earth itself. Now, this certainly means a lot, but we'll talk about it later. Hey, so I'm editing right now and realized that I completely forgot to come back to this topic. So, short version, some kind of planet crashed into the Earth and created the moon, but fragments of that planet were left behind on Earth. Likely, whatever supernatural entity, either the creature or the structure or what have you that's inside of Mount Greylock came from this alien planet. So the source of everything is likely extraterrestrial. We then hear a 911 call from Liam Hollander. Liam was the TV producer who was sent to find Dawn Wright at his house. Liam is noticeably scared. His voice is shaking. He tells the police to come to not his house, but his friend's house and gives the address. When the operator asks if anyone's hurt, Liam says yes, and we are shown the destroyed face of Dawn Wright. It seems that whatever force was responsible for the broadcast hijacking carried out their prediction and murdered Dawn Wright in his home. We then cut once again to Arnold's log. Arnold says that not only were there physical or item offerings, but that there was evidence of mass animal and human sacrifice. Whatever was in this mountain before us, civilizations not only thought that it was worth giving for, but bleeding for as well. Arnold says that he's never been a religious man, but that something beyond explanation exists within Mount Greylock. Even now, despite only being at the mountain for one day, he finds himself constantly thinking about it. Something in that mountain, even with the short exposure he had, is beginning to possess his mind. Arnold says that Frank Porter, again the guy who Paul left the phone calls for, the guy overseeing this project from Semiodyne, called him on March the 28th and told him to go back to the mountain and catalog everything in it. Arnold was offered not only a substantial amount of money, but the rights to the greatest archaeological find of humanity's history. Arnold refuses once again, and at that, Porter simply says thank you for your time and hangs up. Arnold says that he was not going back to that mountain, especially after hearing what happened to the survivors of the Morelli Greylock incident. And survivors is a very strong word. So this is where the concepts, the mentions of body horror, or ideas of it that the series has put up, step all the way to 1,000. So some of the people who we heard screaming and shouting at the end of tape 6 were down in the bottom of the mountain. At some point, some of them got out. And it seems that Semiodyne has been collecting and analyzing the survivors of the incident. And we are then shown a catalog of their malformations. One of them seems relatively normal, perhaps due to low exposure. It just says that he is prone to spontaneous violence. But then the next guy became a rage zombie, a creature full of violence, still retaining its features but distorted and broken. The next malformation, even more so. The body is often a sort of catatonic corpse, but periodically the body will stand up and projectile vomit a sort of nerve gas. The subject is being studied but is under intense quarantine at all times. From here, we just have humans converted to monsters. The next guy became a creature who is immune to pain and exhibits cannibalistic tendencies. The one after that appears benevolent and that it wants to help, only to get people alone. Using this strategy, the monster killed and ate 6 staff members, laughing as he did it. Our next subject is something that more closely resembles the devil than any man. This hellish creature has a supernatural power of suggestion and can seemingly make people perform anything that is to his will. Similar to the others, it can be assumed that this is to kill and consume them. The last subject we see has become a corpse. Outwardly, the corpse appears to be completely dead. However, it emits a plague that if a human comes into contact with it, the plague has a 92% fatality rate. Perhaps at very late stages of exposure to whatever was within the mountain, people become beacons of the sickness within the mountain itself. And from there, we come back to Arnold's statement. This entire section is so cool. Like, oh my gosh, not only are people becoming these like raving monster things, but there's levels of infection. There's some people who are just like sort of zombies, but there's others who are immune to pain. They eat people, they have supernatural suggestion, they're emitting a plague, they're spitting acid. Like, oh, it's so neat. And to see how messed up their faces are. Otherwise, this would line up with the thing I talked about in the Painter series, the scary face issue. Like, that what we're seeing isn't a painting or representation of what's going on. This is just their face. The pictures are just their face. So normally it'd be like, oh, that takes the fun out of it. But no, because here it is still side content. It's still secondary to the horror of what's in the mountain, what's causing it, blah, blah, blah. But it's also... excuse me, but it's also not the totality of what's going on. We know that dozens, if not hundreds of guys were down in that mountain, and we only saw 7 of them, what they look like. What does that mean for everyone else who got infected? It also asks the question, what are they doing to other people? What are these things capable of? And yeah, the faces are pretty scary, but there is so much behind these scary faces that make it so horrifying. It's so cool. Greylock is so good. I want to scream. Arnold mentions that weird stuff hasn't only been happening at Mount Greylock. It's also been happening around the mountain itself. He lists the things that we know of, like the pregnancy phenomena and the attacks and home invasions that have been occurring. But he also mentions something he calls the dead bodies falling from the sky over Cheshire, which, unless I missed that somewhere, hasn't happened yet. It's probably something we'll see later in the series, but dead bodies falling from the sky is probably significant, and that ultimately Arnold says something's about to happen. So Arnold's recording this tape out of fear that Semiodyne or the government or someone is going to kill him for what he knows. And then as he is recording this, he's like, well, at least I have it all out there now. And then there is something at his door pushing it open, which is the thing that's come to kill him. And you know what? I haven't put a single bad thing up on the board for Greylock yet, so why not? Predictable death, because this was a pretty predictable death. The sole survivor recording his log being killed as he's recording his log.
Well, I'm glad that I put all of this into a recording.
I feel like Arnold
Perhaps
Rivers
that was what I
is
needed
about to
snap
die.
me out of this. Honestly, I feel much better just talking about it. This can't be. Oh my god.
Would you look at that? Now, does that really matter? Were the creators of Greylock concerned with making all the deaths unpredictable? Did they really care if the audience knows that Arnold's going to die? No, but I gave him like 3 bad things. I can I can find one to give Greylock. Now, what's interesting is when his door gets opened and whoever this home intruder is starts to come for Arnold, Arnold says that it's his basement door that's being opened. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? How would someone break into your house and come up from the basement? But this is something that's been seen other places in the series as well. All the way back in tape 4, when we saw the camcorder footage, it looks like whoever was walking around in the house before the attack happened was looking up from the basement. But I have a theory as to why the basement door is the point of entry, and I'll talk about it at the end. Arnold panics and turns on his camera and goes and hides in the closet. He says that if anything happens to him and anyone finds this footage, to give it to investigator Jim Melgren of North Adams. This is the second mention of Melgren because if you'll remember, he was the guy in the newspaper from tape 7 who said he doesn't trust the authorities. So this is the second time Melgren has been seen as a source for truth because Arnold trusts him enough that in his death, Melgren will know what to do with these tapes. As Melgren hides in the closet, we hear something running through his house. It stumbles its way sloppily but quickly from room to room looking for him. And from here we get another horrifying reality that these creatures can mimic the sounds of humans they've killed. As, in order to get Arnold to come out, they speak in what sounds like the last words of a lot of people unfortunate enough to run into these home intruders. Eventually, it makes its way to Arnold's closet door, and as it speaks in the voice of a police officer,
"Come on out, it's the police."
it throws open the door and attacks Arnold. And from the sounds of it, begins to eat him. And that last second, the voice of the child saying it's a monster, what was probably the last words of someone that this creature has killed. Oh, it's so good. It's so horrifying. I mean, not that a child died, but it's so scary. It's so good in a horrifying sense. I love it. I've heard a lot of the voice mimicry stuff done before. Mandela Catalog does it. Gemini Home Entertainment does it. You know, Legends of the Wendigo and stuff like that do it a lot. But I love that I can still see new tricks, like the police call to get him to come out, or like the little kid's voice. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Now, we're told a lot in this episode about the whole series, from what happened to the crew on the mountain to what happened to Dawn Wright and blah, blah, blah. And also the second mentions of characters like Jim Melgren, stuff I'll talk about later. But something I want to talk about there right at the end is, did you see the face of the thing that attacked Arnold in the closet? This thing is the same face we saw on the trail camera at the end of tape 6. And it's also the same face we saw during the home invasions in tape 4. Now, could this face just be one of the victims of the mountain? Potentially, but I don't think so. Remember, before anyone at Morelli Construction went insane and became a monster, they were already reporting seeing the tall figure in the woods outside of the construction zone. And then it's the camera that picks up the image of this creature. This creature also seems intelligent enough, whereas, other members of Morelli Construction are described as intelligent. They can manipulate people to get what they want. But this seems to have a goal in mind because it tracked down Arnold specifically. I think this creature, whatever this tall figure, the tall man is, I think that it is some kind of power at play within Mount Greylock itself. Maybe it was one of the first infected, maybe it was a government procedure involving Greylock gone wrong, who knows. But I think this figure has some kind of authority. And because of its presence all the way back in Home Invasion, as well as the faces we see at the end of tape 4, I think it's pretty safe to say that the perpetrators of the home invasions that are running around murdering everyone are the surviving members of the Morelli construction incident. I think that the men became infected within the mountain, and then they poured out of it and began attacking locals in the community. and that this thing, whatever this tall man is, was a part of that. So that ties up some loose ends. It was the construction workers who were causing the home invasions. It was the tall man terrorizing them, who then leads them after they become infected. And it was this tall man who kills Arnold. Now that makes us still ask some questions. Okay, well, if it was the Morelli construction crew who was responsible for the home invasions, where do thought forms tie into everything? Because all we know about them so far is that they can be created, and we supposedly haven't seen a lot of them yet. And I think we have seen a lot of them so far, but I'll explain in a bit. What I will say for now is I think everything that has happened in this series, from the thought forms to obviously the Morelli incident to the baby's disappearance, all of it is connected to Mount Greylock. The series is doing a good job at piecemealing out what we get one step at a time while building up new questions. So with that out of the way, let's get into Tape 9. Tape 9 is titled Trojan Technology. It opens with a Semiodyne computer accessing a newsreel from December the 13th of 1963. 1963 is quite earlier on the timeline than anything we've seen thus far. This is around something called the National Access Initiative, or the NAI, a program put together by Lyndon B. Johnson along with the help of Semiodyne to put necessary electronics like radios, phones, alarms, and what have you in the homes of every American citizen. A glitch shows us that John F. Kennedy did not like Semiodyne's design for the NAI, before showing us another newspaper declaring his death. This implies several things. For one, Semiodyne has been around for a really long time. In a statement made later, they existed pre-20th century. And that also they have enough friends in high places that when the president didn't want their objective, they had a hand in getting the president killed. But why did Semiodyne want people to have technology in their homes so much that they would cause an assassination? We hear a speech from Percival C. Rothwell, the president of the company, in 1963. As he is speaking on the importance of making sure that every human in America is connected and technologically prepared, it's intercut with footage from random people's homes. It seems that the reason Semiodyne wanted to put these new pieces of technology into every house was because they each contained spyware. Cameras and microphones allowing Semiodyne to get information on nearly every house in the country. Now at this point in the series, we're not entirely sure what Semiodyne's goals are, but we know they're privy to things like whatever was buried under Mount Greylock, and so far their technological breakthroughs are spying on people's homes and the thought form manifester. So again, probably not people to be trusted. The footage of Percival cuts with a private conversation that he had with likely another individual at Semiodyne, saying that between how Kennedy has been behaving to them and the CIA, someone needs to kill him. So not explicitly saying that Semiodyne killed the president, just they likely had a hand in it. Or at the very least, the assassination was convenient for their goals. We see that people, or at least more conspiratorial people, have become wise to what Semiodyne is doing, putting messages in front of their camera that only Semiodyne will see. In 1993, we see what appears to be a thought form inside of someone's home. Now this might be a clue as to what Semiodyne's doing. They obviously are invested in thought form technology, at least back into the 80s. And then in the 90s, we see thought forms appearing in people's houses. So maybe, and this is all theory, the thought form manifester in combination with being able to visualize the inside of someone's house can let them place these thought forms into people's homes. Or thought forms are just becoming a more common thing because, again, Semiodyne's tampering, and it's just a coincidence that this camera picked up a thought form in someone's home. The footage begins to glitch, but if we pause it at the right moment, we can see what appears to be a cult wearing sacramental robes in the middle of the woods. There is another glitch in this same tape that shows us this figure with a mask very similar to the other cult members, only this mask is red. Now, we, at this point in the series, don't have any other information that I'm going to cover today involving the cult. The only theory I can give is it's probably a group of people who are familiar or know what's happening in Mount Greylock, very likely connected to Semiodyne. Maybe leaders of Semiodyne are the cult leaders or like the artificers of it. This would tie into a lot of like, conspiratorial Illuminati, the elite rule the world or whatever. And if Semiodyne's as powerful as the series is letting on, maybe they're a part of some cult that worships whatever in the mountain. It's also of note that the masks they're wearing, to me at least, have a striking resemblance to the tall man that killed Arnold and was seen by the Paul Morelli crew on the security cameras when all of that went down. So maybe they're aware of that particular entity and they're worshiping it. Maybe even the tall man is a corrupted one of them and it is wearing a mask. Who knows? But I think there's a connection between Semiodyne, the cult, and the tall man. After this, we see more footage from one of Semiodyne's cameras in 1994. This is of a young girl named Katie who has a terrifying creature appear in her room. Katie can't see very well without her glasses, but the creature identifies himself as Katie's imaginary friend. Katie says it doesn't make any sense. She didn't think of an imaginary friend, but then says maybe he's from, quote, the doctor's office place. This imaginary friend, very devilishly, urges Katie to get closer and closer. And when Katie is in range, the monster jumps, killing the young girl. In the distortion that is shown on the camera, we see this image. This appears to me to be the thought form manifester. We know someone sits down in a chair and something's connected to their brain and they can create creatures from their mind. And we also know that this footage is from 1994. What I think happened is Katie was a part of some kind of trial or experiment involving the thought form manifester. She goes to a lab for an experiment regarding it, or the doctor's office place as she calls it, imagines a creature and doesn't see anything, but it actually worked and the creature followed her home. Then that gets into the whole theory I mentioned at the beginning of my analysis of Greylock when I said, what if the energies that create these tulpas are malevolent? And what if, to her, what might have just been an imaginary friend becomes this monstrous entity? An entity that we see here in 1994 kills the young Katie. That also ties into a very important theory I have in the next video. But for now, let's wrap up tape 9. Tape 9 ends with another camera recording from May the 18th of 1987, as we hear the answering machine of Tiffany Crisaldi. Tiffany Crisaldi, of course, being the woman whose pregnancy just disappeared. And with that, we have the end of tape 9. Another great thing this series does that I want to mention as another pro for it is the connectedness of everything that's going on. It can be hard when you create a series to have all of these different ideas. Like when they made Greylock, they had the idea for a government conspiracy, for tulpas, these imaginary friends that can be created, this Lovecraftian monster within the mountains, local conspiracies regarding police and news agencies or whatever. And it can be hard to make all of that one thing rather than just a bunch of disjointed, scary moments. But truly, the more you watch Greylock, the more everything flows in one direction. Semiodyne is doing this conspiracy to maintain control over people, put cameras in houses, but it's also tied into thought forms, the other thing they were doing. Thought forms is also tied into a series of murders and weird happenings that is occurring. And then at the end of the episode, you get a reminder of Tiffany, another weird occurrence. Everything seems to be pushing one direction. It can be hard to pull off, but Greylock does it quite well. We get a ton of answers to the questions that we've been asking thus far with tape 10. Tape 10, Messages from the Dead, has a caption that reads, "The serpent's right eye was plucked from his head and was transformed, and engulfed in a great flame that was fashioned to provide light for all of creation. And lo, it was made to nourish the earth so that life might thrive and flourish from it." Again, while not a specific piece of scripture, it's very indicative of biblical scripture. So the serpent's right eye was taken and made to be a great flame for all of creation. The serpent we can imagine is referencing the devil or some kind of evil entity, and the great flame, of course, being the sun. However, this is giving us the implication that this good thing that gives us life and the ability to flourish comes from something wicked. More themes to think about as we get into the events of this story. Tape 10 begins with a camera walking through the woods, similar as we saw all the way back in tape 4. Whoever's holding the camera comes across a dead rat, and the guy just picks up the rat and takes it back home with him. We then cut back to Tiffany's answering machine from the end of tape 9. We hear her husband calling her from work over and over. After this, we see her husband, Alexander, in the middle of a police interrogation. Alexander says after they lost the child, he took about a month off work to spend with her because, of course, she was grieving during this time, but eventually he had to go back to work. After he went back to work, he would call her every day at lunch to see how she's doing. Until one day, May the 18th, she didn't call back. This caused Alexander to panic, rush home from work, and that's when he found Tiffany dead. This is then intercut with flashes of some kind of ritual. We see a triangle symbol drawn in the floor with candles lit around it. This imagery continues to creep up into the next episode. Alright, so this leads me into my first theory. I can talk about it now. In the third tape, the orientation, it says that the tape is for Alexander Marsh. And remember how in the last tape, by 1994, they were hosting experiments, and by they I mean either the government or Semiodyne. They were hosting experiments where they were having like young children, like as young as Katie, come in and try to think up creatures to see what would be created. Why they're doing that, who knows, but we know that the general public is being invited in to come up with a thought form. And we know that Alexander Marsh, Tiffany's husband, was given a tape explaining what the thought form manifester was. And in tape 5, when Tiffany's baby disappeared, we heard Tiffany tell the ultrasound technician, I want a baby, but Alexander, her husband, really, really wants a baby. So what if, and this is all theory, it could, in the next episode, prove everything that I'm thinking right now wrong. But for now, hang with me. What if the two of them were unable to have a child, and Alexander wanted one so bad that he signs up for this government trial to come up with a thought form, come up with anything you can think of, and then, what if he gets hooked up to the thought form manifester and imagines a child for his wife to become pregnant with? But what if this happened to several different men or several different people? Because it's implied, even though it hasn't been specifically said yet, the conversation in the hallway during tape 5, as well as the pregnancy phenomena being mentioned, maybe this has happened to several other people as well. So what, it's such a creepy idea. What if several people put a thought form into a woman, or at least Tiffany, to make her believe to be pregnant, and then when that glitch happened, for some reason we don't know yet, all the thought forms disappeared? What if he wanted a child so bad that he made one up? And then maybe it's the fact that under scrutiny, under direct measurements, the child disappeared? Or considering a glitch happened when the disappearance or disappearances took place, maybe some greater entity at control was erasing several thought forms. Who knows? But man, if Semiodyne was allowing people to do that, that's absolutely evil, and the concept alone is absolutely terrifying. So on May the 18th, Tiffany died, again likely her own doing, and we then cut to the medical examiner, Heinrich Albrecht, who is performing the autopsy on Tiffany. As Heinrich is describing Tiffany in the case file, the screen glitches out and we briefly see repeated over and over Revelations 9:6. Look at that, we got a direct Bible verse mention, similar to the captions from earlier, similar to the theming of religion that we've talked about. Revelations 9:6 says, "And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them." I think, for one, this is indicative of what happened to Tiffany, but I also think it's a warning at where this is going. Tiffany's body has a black, gooey substance coming out of her face, and her eyes are retracted back into her skull. On top of that, Tiffany has a weird star symbol with an arrow running through it carved into her body. According to the medical examiner, this carving was made post-mortem, which of course challenges the idea that her death was self-inflicted. I mean, even if it was self-inflicted, what method did she do to cause tar to run out of her face? But the carving proves that someone was there after she died. This also explains why Alexander Marsh is in a police interrogation, because now the authorities suspect that foul play may be involved. Now, here's where the lore around Tiffany gets really interesting. We hear an interview with a young Tiffany Crisaldi, an interview from when she was only 6 years old. See, all we've known about Tiffany up until now is that she was pregnant, her pregnancy disappeared, maybe her husband's fault, and that's all we've got about her. Otherwise, she seems to just be an innocent, unknowing victim to everything that's happening. But here we see that all the way back when she was 6 years old, she was visiting some kind of therapist or psychologist about these visions she was having. From their conversation, it seems that Tiffany has a history of seeing strange figures around her. Possibly as a means to remove these dark thoughts from her mind, the psychologist takes her on a thought experiment where he asks her to close her eyes, visualize her home, and then he takes her on a journey through the home. Again, similar to the phone calls in episode 6, this is a very fascinating scene. So well paced, so well thought out. It's again, incredibly done. In this thought exercise, Tiffany is walking through her home until she arrives at her bedroom. Strangely, a door is now located next to her window that normally isn't there. Tiffany steps into the door and sees a small room. And then here, she says something very interesting.
It's a small room. Somebody's in there.
No, Tiffany, you're alone.
No. There's someone here. He's facing away from me. He's standing and tall. He's very tall.
This tall man that exists in her mind doesn't go away when he's supposed to. Instead, he gets angry. It begins to step towards Tiffany, and right at the crescendo, the tape cuts out. And from there, we are taken back to the medical examiner's report. Okay, for one, that whole scene was incredible. Hats off to everyone involved. You should be proud. But it raises a lot of questions around Tiffany herself. It seems that from a young age, she was already seeing things, perhaps thought forms, perhaps the early visions of thought forms, perhaps she was able to manifest them without the manifester at a young age. Regardless of what it is, she made this entity mad, and she describes it as a very tall man. Now, I know that tall can be kind of ambiguous on its own, but that's the exact same wording we heard Paul describe the creature around the construction site. I think it's the same creature we've seen mentioned in 3 other places throughout the series, occurring now. I think this figure is some kind of being of worship to the cult, and I think from a young age, it was figuratively or literally terrorizing the mind of young Tiffany. So Tiffany goes her whole life being aware of this process. And eventually she gets older, gets with Alexander, and then has a child, but while pregnant with it, it seems the child was a thought form. Now normally, I would say that maybe Tiffany is the one who created the thought form, but what leads me away from saying that is because the tape for the manifester was made for Alexander Marsh. But what this does mean is that Tiffany was in the know about these supernatural creatures, these tulpas, and being similar. So maybe she wasn't as unknowing to what was happening to her as we initially thought. And it leads me in to another theory regarding Tiffany. What if she didn't take her own life as suggested? What if instead that's just what it looks like? We see these flashes of a kind of ritual being performed, and when Tiffany's body's found, it has like the black tar running out of her face. What if Tiffany was so distraught at the sight of her missing infant, what if Tiffany was so broken over losing this child that she went somewhere she hasn't been in a long time? She contacted the things in the back of her mind. She performed some kind of ritual or sacrifice to get it back. And maybe that did take her life for a time, but it did something else as well. In the medical examiner's continuation, he says that one of his assistants heard what sounded like a woman crying coming from the body lockup. The medical examiner sent the assistant home for the night, but confesses now that he heard it too. From here, we cut back to the man who was previously walking through the woods, now back at his home with the dead rat. He cuts open the rat and pulls out a tape from the innards of the rat itself. How did this guy know to just go walking around in the woods and find a dead rat with the tape in it? I don't know. I'm sure we'll get an explanation later, but we ain't got one yet. The tape plays and we see the same star symbol that was carved into Tiffany on screen as a ghastly voice is heard. The voice is speaking to investigator Melgren, the guy who Arnold wanted to get the tapes to, and the cop who from the newspaper flash is suspicious of what the authorities are up to. Melgren was the one who walked through the woods and found the rat, and this tape is for him. The tape addresses him saying that they will not identify themselves and they will not give Melgren a lot of information. Instead, they will just tell him a story. And that they are impressed that Melgren has survived this long, but he has gone to such great lengths to survive. And this leads me to my big theory around Jim Melgren. I think that Melgren is the one who's been doing all of the handheld camcorder tapes up until this point of the series. Think about it. He's an investigator from the nearby town who thinks that something's up, and he's begun to investigate it himself. He's made such a voice for himself doing this that people like Arnold in their moments of death think he might be the one to get the information out. I think it was him who drove out to the woods all the way back in tape 2, came across the blood, ran into something on the snowy road, and then booked it out of there. I think it was him at the beginning of tape 4 who's walking around in the woods at night. Either he was going into a house that he suspected one of these creatures had already made their way into, or it was a house he anticipated an attack to be at and he was trying to save the homeowner. That one's a bit more shaky, but I have no idea why one of these rabid construction crew people would be holding a camcorder and holding it so steady as they work their way into the house. I think it was instead Melgren trying to investigate the home invasions. It also makes sense that all of the handheld at night camcorder shots we see are from the same person, because that kind of repetitive format probably implies the same creator. So Melgren is investigating this as much as he can. He's got some kind of lead that led him to the dead rat in the middle of the woods. And now whatever entity this is, the same entity that was carved into the skin of Tiffany, is now saying that it's impressed with Melgren and will tell him a story. This kind of builds up the idea that Melgren is going to be some sort of protagonist. He's been putting the pieces together. He has narrowly escaped death. If I'm right about the idea that he was in the houses when these creatures were coming in and was present for an attack, that he picked it up on audio in his camera, that guy was like this close to getting eaten alive. But he seems to be resourceful. And for whatever reason, whatever entity this is, the star, so to speak, it's giving him some kind of help. We cut back to the morgue when all of a sudden the door to Tiffany's locker flies open. We see Tiffany's face in the corner of the locker before the video ends on the distortion of her corpse to whatever she's become now. And with that, we have the end of tape 10. So Tiffany is alive, if in some kind of monstrous zombified form. Maybe she performed some kind of ritual to get her child back, or maybe she thought something was going to happen to her, or she did something, she was afraid of something, so she performs a ritual that turns her effectively into this zombified creature. She died, but she is now resurrected. Or alternatively, this is another theory, maybe she did try to take her own life, but then someone else performed the ritual. Maybe her husband, who got home, performed some kind of ritual or what have you, but something was performed that brought her back from the dead. It could be someone against her will, because as the Revelations 9:6 said, people will seek death but not be able to find it. Either way, Tiffany's some monstrous entity that will probably be a problem in the future. What interests me is, why is the same symbol that was carved into her skin after she died, probably by either whatever or whoever performed the ritual that brought her back to life, why is that the same symbol who is giving Melgren advice? Because you would assume Tiffany's resurrection to be some kind of evil or malicious act, and you would assume helping investigator Melgren to be a good act. Maybe one of them is good and the other's bad, or vice versa. Maybe they're both good acts. Maybe Tiffany getting resurrected is a good thing somehow, even if she looks like this. Maybe they're both bad acts and this voice is leading Melgren astray. I don't know yet, but I feel like there's two different players involved. Sure, the symbol of the star and the arrow could just be the tall man or whatever the thing is in Mount Greylock. This could just be another appendage of it, so to speak. Or maybe it's some kind of competitor. In a representative sense, if the tall man or the stuff at Mount Greylock is the devil, maybe there is a kind of savior figure or angelic figure in the story. Still evil, still something dark, but something that is trying to guide our protagonist and our main characters away to defeat the evil. Now, I don't know, that could be totally wrong. I'm just trying to guess with the few pieces that we have, but for some reason I feel like this star and arrow, whatever it is different from the thing inside of Greylock Mountain, or Mount Greylock, whatever. With all of that out of the way, we can move into the final tape of the series to date. However, again, I encourage you, the series is still ongoing. Go subscribe to it. Knowing my luck, during the editing of this, another one will come out. But as of right now, tape 11 is the most recent tape. Tape 11 is titled Preparations for a Guest, and the description reads, "What you so fear, so I am." We begin with the program guide from the local news 13. a program called Inside These Walls, which is about basement renovation. It can be assumed we're then taken to that program as we see someone putting heavy barricades on a basement door. The cameraman shows us that the room is empty and the intense reinforcement they've put to the outside of the basement door. Now, for one, because this is a handheld camera, going off of my theory, we can assume that this is Jim Melgren. See, the reinforcements on the basement door are made on the outside of the door, meaning it's not a safe room that you can barricade to stay safe from the outside. It is a room that you would use to keep something trapped on the inside. As he's showing us this, the footage begins to overlap with the footage from the ritual in tape 10. Melgren, or at least who I'm assuming is Melgren, then walks into the room and plugs in a cassette player. After hitting play, it seems to be an audio recording of a man crying. It glitches between footage of the cassette player and the ritual before the video ends. Okay, so what I think just happened is I think Melgren got information from that cassette tape, the one at the end of tape 10 with the star in it and all that gave him more information on how to combat these creatures. Remember all the stuff about the basement door that I've mentioned earlier in the series, that these home invaders, it seems they were coming from the basement door. When Arnold is attacked, he says something opened his basement door. And you know how these creatures, at least the construction crew that's been transformed, you know how they're like down in the mountain and all of these attacks are happening around the mountain of Greylock? What if, again, theory, but what if these creatures aren't like just on land and they're not just running at people through the woods? Some of them are, because we saw the footage at the end of tape 4 of them pushing up the window to get inside, and we saw the blood on the snowy trails. So there's some things killing people out on land. But what if some of them are in these tunnels underneath everywhere around Mount Greylock? And what if the way some of these home invasions are occurring, or at the very least, the invasions caused by the tall man, the big guy, right? The one we saw kill Arnold, because we know that came from the basement. What if they're burrowing under the ground and coming up in people's basements, and that's how they're getting into people's homes? So maybe Melgren, who has found information about that, has gone into his basement. He has turned it into a reinforced room so that he can trap whatever's in there, and then he turns on a cassette player of men crying as bait. This is, oh, it's so gnarly. I love it. So these creatures, what if they respond to the sounds of a human in distress? Like the way a predator would respond to the sound of a rabbit being hurt. Or like hunting dogs respond to squeaky noises because it sounds like an injured animal. What if these things respond to the sound of a human in distress? And he has set up a room to trap one that burrows into his basement, or perhaps appears in his basement, so that he can catch it to either kill it or learn more about them. For one, I think it's so awesome if Melgren is like this about it, like he's this diehard for the cause. He's like, yeah, I'll use my home as a potential quarantine zone for the devil. Who cares? That's really cool, but it's also an insanely cool concept if I'm right about the whole burrowing thing, and these creatures are using tunnels that maybe were pre-built under the mountain, or maybe they dig out themselves. I mean, imagine living around the area. Is that not like the worst scenario ever? Like, you could secure your house all you want, but if you got a basement, looks like you're dead. Now, some people have mentioned in the comments of that video that it sounds like the cassette tape is similar to Alexander's police interrogation that we heard from tape 10. And I don't really hear it. I don't really agree with that 100%. But the intercut with the ritual that we see in tape 11, that we also saw in tape 10, does kind of imply some connection between what Melgren's doing now and Alexander and Tiffany. So if that is Alexander's voice on the cassette tape, maybe he's using it as a lure for Tiffany specifically. That would also make sense why the star creature, or I keep calling it the star creature, the logo of the star with the arrow, it makes sense why that logo, the same logo we saw on Tiffany, tells Melgren something, and then the next thing we see, Melgren's trying to trap Tiffany. That does track. Either scenario is absolutely horrifying. The ghastly zombie ghost wife coming to the sounds of her crying husband, or these transformed rage zombie construction crew burrowing through the dirt to find people in distress. Both are terrifying and both are awesome. And with all of that, we have the ending of Greylock. And like I just said, my thoughts on the entire series is that it's horrifying and excellent. There are so many things that we've got answers to, like what was causing the attacks on individuals, who's recording with the camcorder. We've got pieces like that, but there's still so much more to be asked. Like, what exactly is the tall man or the cult, or what's happening in the mountain? What exactly were the infants? If they were thought forms, why did they disappear? How many things are we encountering that are thought forms? How do thought forms tie in to the greater implications of Mount Greylock? How does Semiodyne know about all this? What's their hand in it? To what level are the public aware of these creatures? How many more creatures are there we haven't seen yet? What was the bodies over Cheshire? There's so much good stuff, and it's so cool, and I absolutely love it. It has built out a world that I am desperate to see more of. I am subscribed to them. I've got the bell notifications on. The millisecond that a new episode drops, I'm dropping everything to watch it. It has become one of my favorites. I can't wait to see where it goes from here. To everyone involved on the project, Rob, Matt, and everyone else, hats off. You really knocked it out of the park. And the reason I wanted to talk about today, and the reason I wanted to talk about in comparison to something like The Painter, is because a lot of people have the mindset that analog horror is dead, like I talked about at the beginning, that internet horror has had its time in the limelight, and now it's gone and we need to move on to something else. I have absolutely no idea how you can watch Greylock and still think that. Greylock is one of the coolest horror projects I've ever seen come out of anything online. And again, I hear you all. I understand where you're coming from. I didn't want to bash this 100% directly, but I understand the criticism. I think this can be something more, but I think Greylock already is. So if you don't get anything else out of this video, because as always, I'm just a guy talking about art. This is actual art. This is actual performance. It means far more than my criticisms or praises for it ever could, right? So if you're interested in The Painter, again, I can't recommend it because of the heavy imagery and stuff like that, but if that doesn't bother you, if you're interested, link in the description. And to literally everyone, go subscribe to Greylock, go check them out. I couldn't recommend it more. So hopefully you all enjoyed this video of me talking about it. Thank you for sticking around this long as you have. And yeah, thank you for watching. Man, this was a weird kind of video. Like, I haven't done anything like this. It felt weird because I want to do a video about Greylock, going over it because I really like it. But I also wanted to do a video talking about like analog horror is dead, or like the online, digital horror, online horror is dead, or whatever. But I don't want to make a just entirely negative video that I don't feel right just making a video that's like, things are bad, I disagree, and that's it. So I thought, why not use two series that are coming out right now I get to talk about Greylock, and I'll talk about why I hear you people who don't like it, but really, Greylock's incredible, and I want to see this become more. So hopefully you all enjoyed. I have no idea how long this video is going to be. I'm sure it's got at least the hour mark or something there. The plan for this video was it was going to be like right at an hour or something. So we'll see. But it's me and my Yaposaurus up here anyway. For real, thank you all for being here. It means the world. Thank you so much for the support that you've shown me. Go support these series. The support on the Ted Kaczynski video was amazing. I was assuming that if YouTube didn't take it down, people wouldn't like it because it's a different thing for me, like not the true crime part, but the part describing like the manifesto and his stuff. And a lot of you people seem to like that, kind of my ideas around it. And that means a lot. I appreciate it. So thank you for the support you've shown me on that. Thank you so much for the support that you have already shown. I'll pull this one off the wall. For the support that you all have already shown this guy. It means the world. Again, link in the description if you're interested. He will only be available for a very short amount of time, and then he's gone forever. Like, we're talking a week, probably not two. So if you want in on it, get in on it now. Links in the description. And the two podcasts that I'm starting, The Red Thread and CreepCast, both of those linked in the description. Go get, also over the course of recording, I've confirmed that the CreepCast link is in the description. When I started, I didn't know if we'd have the channel up, but the channel is up. So head to the link in the description for both of those if you're interested. Thank you all so much for the kind words you've given me to the few people I have mentioned that I'm starting podcasts. And hopefully you all enjoy. I hope that I can put on more of a show for you than I already am, and that you guys like it enough to stick around. It really does mean the world. So again, check out these series, check out this poster, check out the 2 podcasts linked below. You all are incredible. It really does mean the world. Now I'm going to get to editing this behemoth of a video, and hopefully you all will see it soon. But with all of that out of the way, I believe that should do it for now. But I just want to say, thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.